Hey everyone, tonight we're taking a detour from the usual academic fare and diving into something a bit more herbal and mysterious, a journey into the smoky, fragrant realm of medieval intoxication. Yes, the people back then indulged in it. But trust me, things got weird, occasionally creative, and definitely unexpected. So before we settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content here. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the diverse places and times people join us from all around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's slowly drift into tonight's fascinating journey together. It's easy to picture the Middle Ages as a bleak, muddy parade filled with monks, plagues, and potatoes. But beyond all that wool and gloom, there were real people, flawed, curious experimenters, who sometimes stumbled upon odd paths and wondered, what happens if I drink this strange brew mixed with hot wine? And honestly, who can fault them? There was no electricity, no coffee, no antidepressants available, and local entertainment options were limited to watching a nightbird or guessing how long your neighbor would keep dancing before falling from some mysterious poisoning. So, if someone offered a mushroom that promised to make you forget the feudal system for a few hours, you'd probably be tempted to try it too. Contrary to what many might assume today, the use of substances to expand the mind, ease pain, or just make life a little more bearable wasn't unusual. It was woven right into the fabric of medieval culture. But it wasn't called getting high. There were no giggling stoner duos hiding behind haystacks. Instead, the experiences were framed in mystical terms like visionary states, divine inspiration, pain relief, or, in the worst cases, outright danger. Doctors prescribed herbs. Monks cultivated them, and witches, depending on who told the story, applied them in their own ways. Nearly everyone crossed paths with such substances at some point, whether through medicine, ritual, or simply eating moldy bread by accident. And the range of medieval intoxicants went far beyond just a tankard of warm ale, though that certainly helped ease the mood. There were roots that cried out with pungency, flowers that clouded vision, seeds that sparked prophetic dreams, and ointments that made people believe they were flying naked across the sky alongside Satan's catering crew. Getting high wasn't always recreational. It was often medicinal, spiritual, or sometimes just a case of really poor judgment on an empty stomach. Depending on your social status, these substances might have come into your life from a barber, a nun, or a barefoot peasant named Wolf, who learned their secrets from an extraordinarily wise squirrel. In medieval times, you didn't need a shadowy alley or an exclusive club to get your hands on mind-altering substances. All you needed was a garden, a mortar and pestle, and a casual disregard for precise dosages. Back then, nature itself was the dealer, and she wasn't always gentle. Medieval Europe was bursting with plants, roots, fungi, and resins that could either cure your headache or convince you that you just married the devil himself. So buckle up as we explore these fascinating and often bizarre realms of medieval intoxication. Back in medieval times, the line between medicine and mystical experience was blurry, often more of an artistic interpretation than a clear boundary. Physicians, monks, midwives, and wandering herbalists each had their unique approaches to botany, ranging from well-trained expertise to enthusiastic dabbling. If you needed something to knock you out, soothe your nerves, or even experience divine visions from your soup, there were various options available. Take henbane, for instance, a plant that was essentially nature's version of Russian roulette. When properly prepared, henbane could ease pain and bring restful sleep. However, if handled incorrectly, it could cause convulsions and trigger bizarre behaviors like an uncontrollable urge to remove your shoes and dart through the forest screaming. Then there was mandrake, a root that vaguely resembled a human figure. Growing legends claimed it emitted a deadly scream when uprooted, so lethal that it could kill a person. Despite this chilling warning, people still harvested it, often tying the root to a dog and standing safely at a distance to do the dirty work. Consuming mandrake could induce unconsciousness and vivid visions, sometimes even prophetic dreams. But on a bad day, one might not survive to tell the tale. Deadly nightshade, or belladonna, carries a name that clearly signals danger. While used to dilate pupils for beauty, belladonna also served to relieve pain, cause hallucinations, and occasionally brought death itself. Self-care in medieval times was certainly a bold undertaking. These potent herbs were commonly combined into teas, tinctures, oils, or the infamous flying ointments, some of which we'll explore shortly. Often these concoctions weren't consumed by choice, but applied during religious rituals, medical treatments, or administered by attentive apothecaries who believed a little extra root wouldn't hurt, only to discover just how wrong they could be. Henbane deserves a special mention as the medieval equivalent of the reckless "let's see what this button does" approach. Known scientifically as Hioshiamus niger, and notorious for making Uncle Bernard believe he was a duck, henbane was a cornerstone of the Middle Ages' unofficial pharmacy. It was used across Europe for centuries, a plant that embodied a whole mood. Monks meticulously documented its properties in herbals. Physicians employed it for pain relief. Witches used it to fuel their imagination-fueled broomstick rides, and peasants mostly hoped to avoid accidentally eating it. What did henbane actually do? Well, it depended heavily on the dose. In small amounts, it acted as a sedative, alleviating toothaches, helping with insomnia, and easing the pain of childbirth. Think of it as the medieval version of "take two and try not to scream." But in higher or miscalculated doses, henbane could trigger delirium, hallucinations, severe agitation, and sometimes even a profoundly confusing encounter, like carrying on a heartfelt chat with a turnip you believed was your late grandmother. Its active compounds, scopolamine and hyoscyamin, interfere with brain neurotransmitters. Simply put, henbane made your medieval brain go haywire. Visual distortions, disorientation, dry mouth, extreme thirst, and spontaneous bursts of bizarre interpretative dancing were typical side effects. Henbane was often smoked or brewed into teas, making it a versatile but unpredictable ingredient in the medieval pharmacopoeia. In medieval times, people had all sorts of unusual ways to alter their consciousness. One popular method was to mix certain plants with fat, and then smear this concoction on the skin. This approach especially attracted those who didn't want their thoughts to follow a straightforward path. Now, was this practice legal? Technically, yes. Back then, the concept of controlled substances had not yet been established. However, the practice was quite controversial, particularly from the perspective of the Church. Any alteration of perception was met with suspicion because visions and insights were supposed to come only from saints, not from plants or herbs. Despite the skepticism, henbane maintained a dedicated following among healers, mystics, and those desperate enough to take risks. In fact, henbane found its way into some beer recipes before safer ingredients like hops replaced it. Few plants in the medieval world elicited as much fear, reverence, and misunderstanding as mandrake, a root renowned for its potency and its eerie human-like shape. Known scientifically as Mandragora officinarum, the mandrake became entwined with legends about sleep, hallucinations, fertility, and visions. The outcomes of using it were highly unpredictable. Either one experienced mystical dreams or ended up unconscious, sometimes found beside a bewildered goat. Either way, it caused an effect. Medieval herbalists believed that the mandrake root, often resembling a stubby, curled human figure, held powerful magical and medicinal qualities. It acted as a sedative, an anesthetic, and an aphrodisiac. Some even considered it a bridge to prophetic dreams. For example, boiling the root in wine could relieve pain or induce calm. Inhaling its fumes, however, could provoke intense questioning of one's life choices. Perhaps the most infamous characteristic of the mandrake was its reputed ability to scream when uprooted. Yes, actual screaming. Warnings in medieval texts suggested that hearing a mandrake scream would kill a man outright. Because of this belief, creative and ethically questionable harvesting methods emerged. The best known was tying the root to a dog, then walking away while the dog pulled it free. The logic was that the dog would perish from the scream instead of the human. Today, such a practice would certainly raise ethical concerns. Once the mandrake had been harvested and the dog mourned, the root could be dried, ground into powder, steeped, or even worn as a charm. Some carried tiny mandrake figurines in pouches, believing these offered protection from evil or enhanced fertility. After all, nothing says romance like a shriveled root that allegedly screams when disturbed. Unsurprisingly, the church viewed mandrake with disfavor. Any substance capable of provoking visions outside the formal religious framework was often lumped into witchcraft. Yet monks still carefully documented mandrake recipes and herbals, complete with detailed instructions. When used correctly, mandrake could ease pain before surgery, combat insomnia, and induce vivid, often surreal dreams. Used improperly, it could lead to vomiting, loss of consciousness, or even cause one's family to organize an exorcism due to suspicions that a whispering soup was involved. Imagine you were a medieval noblewoman seeking to captivate attention at a feast. You might choose to wear your finest linen or weave flowers into your hair. But if you were truly determined to stand out, you might resort to something far more daring. Applying a dangerous poison directly to your eyes. This is where belladonna enters the scene, also known by its other name, Atropa belladonna, a plant notorious for its toxic yet alluring properties. Let's talk about belladonna, also known more forebodingly as deadly nightshade. Just hearing its name conjures images of an ultimate villain in a medieval role-playing game, doesn't it? And it lived up to that reputation, both dangerously attractive and deadly. Think of it as the botanical equivalent of a bewitching yet unpredictable character. The term belladonna translates to beautiful lady, and that's because a few drops of its extract, when applied to the eyes, cause the pupils to dilate. In medieval times, large, wide eyes were considered not only beautiful but mysterious, and even saintly. However, this allure came at a price: blurry vision, extreme sensitivity to light, and sometimes unintended side effects. But then again, beauty standards have never been gentle. Beyond its cosmetic use, belladonna had a variety of other applications. It served as a painkiller, a sleep aid, and occasionally as a kind of truth serum, though the truths it revealed were often nonsensical, like the ceiling dripping Latin prayers. This is because belladonna contains atropine and scopolamine, powerful compounds that interfere with the nervous system, causing effects ranging from mild hallucinations to the sensation of vibrating wallpaper. As a result, belladonna was a popular ingredient in potions, flying ointments, and some highly questionable medical treatments. Need to numb a patient before amputating a limb? Belladonna was your go-to. Want to induce a death-like sleep for theatrical performances or suspicious reasons? Belladonna again. Curious to unintentionally meet a handful of saints? And maybe the devil in your dreams? Belladonna could deliver. Despite its toxicity, belladonna was a staple in medieval medicine, utilized either cautiously or recklessly, depending on how severe the plague was that week. It featured prominently in herbal remedies, recipes, and even love charms throughout Europe. Before the advent of modern edibles with their neatly packaged and fruity flavors, medieval people experimented with ointments, balms, tinctures, and potions. And make no mistake, the word ointment rarely inspires confidence, especially when the recipe called for ingredients like belladonna, black cat fat, and an uncertain quantity of hemlock, all stirred counterclockwise under the light of a full moon. Welcome to the world of medieval transdermal delivery methods. In other words, rubbing bizarre pasties onto your skin and crossing your fingers for a good outcome. These concoctions were never intended for casual enjoyment. Many had ties to rituals, folk medicine, and spiritual experiences. They could induce deep unconsciousness, ecstatic trance states, or, if applied improperly, make you believe you were transforming into a lizard. While the application was often topical, which might sound safer, this changed once you realized that the preferred sites for absorption were the mucous membranes. Yes, those sensitive membranes. Cue the infamous flying ointments associated with witches, a potent mix of henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and pig fat, usually applied to intimate areas. The aim was to create an exhilarating sensation of flight. The result was either a transcendent astral journey or waking up in a haystack with half your teeth missing, and no idea how you got there. Beyond these salves, medieval potions were often consumed mixed in wine, broth, or a suspiciously foul-smelling liquid. Apothecaries loved dispensing these potent brews, weaving them into the fabric of medieval life and lore. Imagine mixing poppy extract with spiced wine, a potent blend strong enough to numb pain during surgery, or if you're unlucky, to hurl you into a front row seat of a divine revelation you never asked for. Then there were the elixirs peddled by wandering quacks, those traveling pharmacists who promised miraculous cures for everything from heartbreak to plague. Their recipes were so potent that some could even dissolve a shoe. Did these concoctions actually work? Perhaps. Or maybe they simply helped you forget what was bothering you in the first place. The true magic of these medieval edibles lay in their unpredictable effects. Would they lull you into peaceful sleep, allow you to commune with angels, or cause you to scream at the moon while swearing eternal loyalty to a humble turnip? There was only one way to find out. Now, let's dive into the fascinating story of the broomstick, the iconic airborne symbol famously associated with medieval witches. While it may seem quaint today, something you'd see only in fairy tales or Halloween costumes, this humble broomstick carried a surprisingly scandalous history. Spoiler alert: broomsticks weren't just for sweeping floors. The link between witches and broomsticks has roots that are, quite literally, chemical. Historical records, especially those penned by suspicious inquisitors, talk about witches using flying ointments. Thick, trance-inducing salves crafted from plants like henbane, belladonna, and datura. Think of them as nature's equivalent of a very angry, intoxicated porcupine. But here's the twist. Witches didn't ingest these potions. Why not? Because these ingredients were highly toxic, and the stomach wouldn't take kindly to them. Instead, they applied the ointments topically, on the skin. And by skin, we really mean mucous membranes. Yes, exactly where you're thinking. Hence, the broomstick, or, as some sources delicately put it, a staff anointed for transportation, became the perfect tool. Users would rub the magical ointment onto the broomstick's handle, and then apply it to those sensitive, highly absorptive areas. This wasn't exactly family-friendly, but it was very effective. Within minutes, those brave, or foolish, enough reported vivid hallucinations of flying through the night sky, attending devilish feasts, or hovering mysteriously above their village like the world's most confused drone. Of course, these were purely hallucinations. a blend of botany and mysticism in an era where medicine, magic, and spirituality were inseparable roommates. Inquisitors and theologians couldn't ignore these tales, but not because they were fascinated by herbal chemistry. Instead, they saw flying as undeniable proof of consorting with demons, an accusation laden with tragic irony, since the flying was chemically induced and utterly unreliable. But then again, medieval justice rarely bothered with solid evidence. While medieval Europe was busy smearing toxic ointments on broomsticks and declaring it witchcraft-fueled flight, something far more sophisticated was unfolding to the south and east, amid the bustling cities of the Islamic Golden Age. Enter hashish, the plant-based solution to existential dread and camel traffic. Extracted from cannabis resin, hashish was widely consumed across regions like Persia, Egypt, and the Levant. Unlike Europe's risky trial-and-error approach to mind-altering substances, Islamic scholars, mystics, and physicians documented hashish's effects with remarkable precision and detail. This was a cultured intellectual engagement with psychoactive substances, rather than fearful superstition or crude pharmacology. Back in the day, hashish was often tested in the field, marking an early chapter in edible cannabis use. Usually taken orally, hashish was mixed with sweet honey, fragrant spices, or other herbs, creating the first genuinely tasty edible experience. Quite a departure from medieval Europe's grim tradition of bitter teas and foods that carried the aroma of spoiled sock. But hashish wasn't purely about recreation, though that certainly happened. It had a strong connection to Sufism, the mystical strain of Islam, where followers sought a spiritual oneness with the divine. Hashish was thought to dissolve the ego, clear the mind, and spark deep reflection, or at the very least, provoke long contemplative stares at plain walls. Many Sufi poets and philosophers wrote about hashish with the kind of poetic intensity and abstract metaphor that modern songwriters might reserve for heartbreak, leaving you wondering if they were emotionally all right. Of course, not everybody embraced it. Numerous Islamic rulers attempted to outlaw hashish use, fearing it caused laziness, moral decay, or even too much giggling during prayers. But like most substance bans throughout history, these attempts were about as effective as teaching a cat to juggle. Then there's the legendary Hashin, the original assassins, who were allegedly known to use hashish before missions to get into the right mindset for their deadly tasks. While this is mostly myth, it underscores how cannabis products were already wrapped in a mix of mystique and suspicion. Meanwhile, Europe was still centuries behind in understanding cannabis, often reacting by either burning things or branding it as devil grass. Now, imagine a medieval church. Stained glass windows, flickering candles, solemn chanting, and an almost otherworldly haze of incense drifting through the air like God's own fog machine. But incense wasn't just for holiness. It carried a little secret too. Psychoactive qualities. Take the two big players, frankincense and myrrh, resinous substances imported from the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa. They burned these in churches, temples, and royal courts to purify the air, ward off evil spirits, and mask the smell of unwashed wool and fish stew. Here's the twist. Modern science shows burning frankincense releases compounds, especially sensyl acetate, that affect the brain's limbic system. Put simply, if you sat long enough in that smoky air, Gregorian chant wasn't the only thing making your head feel floaty. In the stiflingly unventilated medieval chapels, of which there were many, prolonged exposure to incense smoke could cause a mild sedative effect, especially when combined with fasting, dehydration, or the unbearable boredom of long services. Monks and devotees sometimes reported visions during these extended ceremonies, crediting divine inspiration, but it's quite possible some were simply feeling the resin's subtle high. And if you think these effects were only in Christian places, think again. Incense was also a common presence in mosques, synagogues, and Buddhist temples, where similar sensory experiences likely occurred. Let's take a journey back to the Middle Ages, where certain practices went far beyond just religious rites. Incense burning, for example, wasn't confined to Christian ceremonies. It also appeared in earlier pagan rituals, showing how some traditions transcended religion entirely. Everyone simply appreciated a captivating atmosphere. Clerics at the time claimed that the smoke of incense elevated the soul toward heaven, but in truth, it might have acted more as a subtle buffer against the harshness of reality, making those marathon 5-hour sermons bearable. Imagine it as the medieval equivalent of putting on laid-back lo-fi beats and lighting a scented candle, only with more Latin chants and less chill. If there was one thing medieval people could always rely on besides relentless taxes and periodic plagues, it was alcohol. From beer and ale to mead, wine and cider, chances are there was a batch being brewed in a wooden barrel behind someone's home, often hailed as medicine. And, to be honest, it was a form of medicine. Drinking water wasn't exactly safe. Natural water sources were often contaminated or located downstream from where livestock roamed. So, taking a sip was basically a dangerous game of intestinal roulette. Instead, folks leaned towards fermented drinks. This brings us to small beer, a mild alcoholic beverage akin to Laqua, but definitely with a kick and often brewed by someone named Edith, who relied on intuition and a bit of prayer to measure the ingredients. This low-alcohol drink was consumed daily by adults and children alike, not with the intention of getting drunk, but to maintain hydration and enjoy a light buzz. Yet, not all medieval alcohol was so mild. Better-off individuals or those with a free afternoon might indulge in stronger ales, honey mead, or imported wines. Wine in particular was often mixed with herbs and spices, not just for taste, but for medicine, or simply just to experiment. Brewing was no mere household chore in monasteries. It was almost sacred. Monks refined recipes, meticulously documented fermentation techniques, and enthusiastically sampled, earning themselves quite the reputation. If salvation ever came served in a pint glass, the Benedictine monks were undoubtedly ahead of the game. But alcohol was more than just a drink. It was woven deeply into medieval life. Looking to numb the torment of medieval dentistry, alcohol helped. Dealing with blues or melancholy, spiced wine came to the rescue. Trying to forget a drafty hovel shared with 6 other souls, and one particularly judgmental chicken. Mead and good company at taverns, inns, and roadside alehouses served as the century's version of therapy, albeit with more shouting. People drank to celebrate victories, mourn losses, gossip, and even invent completely unnecessary new dance moves. Sometimes, getting high wasn't even a choice. It was just part of breakfast. And that brings us to ergot, a parasitic fungus growing on rye and cereal grains. To the untrained medieval eye, it looked like just a strangely blackened kernel. But to modern science, it's a biological prankster packed with side effects that read like a medieval nightmare. Convulsions, hallucinations, burning sensations in the limbs. And occasionally, the bizarre feeling that your hands had transformed into spiders crawling about. This fungus was the accidental ingredient behind what some historians consider history's first LSD trip. Centuries before the summer of love, Woodstock, or anything remotely resembling tie-dye came along. This occurred primarily in cooler, damp European regions like France and the Germanic territories, where the climate was just right for this eerie plant parasite to thrive. In medieval times, people often unknowingly consumed bread, baked from rye, infected with a toxic fungus called ergot. Why did this happen? Because hunger always outweighed any concerns about fungal contamination. Entire villages would eat loaves laced with this mold without realizing the danger. The consequences were both alarming and astonishing. The condition caused by ergot poisoning had two distinct forms, both of which were terrifying. The first, known as convulsive ergotism, brought about muscle spasms, seizures, hallucinations, and sudden episodes of uncontrollable laughter or panic. The second, gangrenous ergotism, was even more gruesome. It cut off blood flow to extremities, causing limbs to turn black, shrivel, and eventually fall off. Clearly, not the kind of ingredient you wanted at a dinner party. These outbreaks led to strange and disturbing public phenomena. Entire groups would dance uncontrollably for days, a phenomenon now known as dancing plagues, sometimes dancing themselves to death. At the time, people attributed these events to demonic possession, divine punishment, or moral failing. However, the reality was likely an accidental mass poisoning from ergot-tainted bread. Ironically, the Order of St. Anthony, renowned for running hospitals treating victims, often cured their patients by switching their diets from rye back to safer wheat bread. That simple dietary change could save lives. But did bakers or villagers at the time understand this connection? Not really. For them, bread was either wholesome or cursed, and they certainly had no way to test for psychoactive alkaloids contaminating their food. Their focus was more on avoiding excommunication than chemical analysis. Some modern scholars even speculate that ergot poisoning might have played a role in the infamous Salem witch trials, given the reported hallucinations, paranoia, and convulsions. While still debated, one thing is certain. Medieval Europeans were getting inadvertently intoxicated from their bread and had no idea. You've probably heard of magic mushrooms and flying ointments, but what about mad honey? In certain remote parts of the medieval world, bees produced a rare potent honey that was as intoxicating as it was dangerous. This specialty honey came from the mountainous Black Sea region of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, where bees gathered nectar from rhododendron flowers. These pretty pink blossoms hid a dark secret. They contained grayonotoxins, natural compounds that wreak havoc on the human nervous system. The resulting mad honey caused dizziness, hallucinations, vomiting, slowed heartbeat, and spiritual visions, usually in that order. Small amounts gave a mild euphoric buzz. Larger doses turned your day into a surreal, slow-motion spectacle. This honey was no mere curiosity. It was weaponized. Historical records reveal that invading armies were poisoned by mad honey deliberately left behind in deserted villages. Soldiers, thinking they had found a free snack, soon found themselves convulsing helplessly, realizing too late that this was no ordinary treat. Ancient Greek and Roman authors, like Xenophon and Strabo, described these effects centuries before the Middle Ages, yet the dangerous use of mad honey continued well into medieval times. Local populations learned to manage it carefully. A bit on bread eased headaches. A splash in wine triggered visions, but none at all if you wanted to keep your wits about you. In the medieval world, mad honey earned a reputation not only as a medicinal cure, but also as a substance used for recreation, especially within mystical or folk healing traditions. Some users swore it induced prophetic dreams, while others ended up waking confused, clutching a potato they insisted was their uncle. Experiences varied widely, yet mad honey was definitely traded and sought after. Enterprising merchants packaged it carefully in small ceramic jars, usually with no instructions on dosage, because after all, this was a time when leeches were hailed as advanced medical treatment, and cautionary labels were unheard of. The Middle Ages weren't solely dominated by priests, nobles, or peasants plagued by disease. Hidden in the margins thrived a network of semi-legitimate healers, shamans, herbalists, cunning folk, who worked their own blend of medicine and mischief. You could liken them to medieval pharmacists of sorts, operating without regulation, but with an intimate knowledge of herbs and moss. These were the people you sought out when your local physician suggested bloodletting for a painfully swollen tooth. These practitioners often had no formal degrees, yet their vast herbal wisdom was passed down through generations, often learned by watching grandmothers treat boils with bark and quiet strength. When it came to mind-altering substances, these individuals were the experts you turned to. They knew just which plants to grind into pastes, which roots to soak in wine, and exactly how much of an herb could safely send you dreaming of angels instead of accidentally calling one home. Whether your goal was pain relief, visions, cursing a neighbor, or even achieving an out-of-body experience during chores like laundry, these healers had remedies, often multiple options, and many of them were women, midwives, wise women and community healers crucial to local life, but deeply feared by authorities. Their threat to power wasn't due to any stereotypical witch cliches, but because they held secrets and knowledge that needed no Latin to validate. Their cures commonly involved potent plants like henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and poppies. These ingredients were mixed with wine, fat, honey, or sometimes even spit. Yes, spit was sometimes part of the formula. After a few protective chants, you'd be sent on your way with a concoction that could either heal your pain or compel wild confessions of crimes never committed. When strange side effects struck, hallucinations involving flying goats or an unexplainable desire to marry a tree, the blame often swung from a bad batch to accusations of witchcraft. The church and local authorities kept these folk closely watched, serving both as patrons and wary observers. Despite the risks, communities depended on them. When children had fevers, when joints ached, or when you needed to reach out to a deceased relative to find hidden rent money, these were the people called upon. They weren't doctors in the formal sense, nor priests. They were arguably the original underground wellness influencers. Amid all the salves, brews, roots, ointments, incense, bees, and sometimes questionable bread, one major question lingered. How did medieval people truly feel about getting high? The answer was complex, marked by both deep ambivalence and occasional humor. For many, especially healers and herbalists, mind-altering substances were simply practical tools. If they eased pain, quieted a fevered mind, or opened a door to spiritual insight, they were valued. But the social and spiritual implications made the relationship anything but simple. In medieval times, even the slightest relief in childbirth, say, a 1% reduction in horror, was a cause for celebration. This was the realm of medicine, not mischief. Sure, the patient might start uttering psalms backward or insist that the cat spoke fluent French, but if the swelling subsided, that was considered a victory. Then came the spiritual users, monks, mystics, and those intrigued by divine communication. For them, hallucinations weren't alarming. Instead, they were cherished revelations. Visions signified sanctity rather than symptoms of illness. Staring into the void and hearing it whisper back in Latin, that was a fast track to sainthood, or at the very least, having your own chapel mural painted in your honor. However, intent was paramount. Accidentally getting high was tolerated. Seeking a high to see Jesus was accepted, but seeking one to flirt with a goat demon, that crossed a line. This is when the church intervened, branding certain substances and their users as either suspicious or outright heretical. Any experience involving a loss of control, through intoxication, trance, or inconvenient honesty, sparked clerical suspicion. Saints might have visions, but peasants were more likely considered possessed. Among common folk, however, attitudes were far more relaxed. That neighbor's sleeping potion could easily double as a psychedelic nightcap. But people relied on poppy wine to ease pain, hashish for calmness, and henbane tea to endure challenging in-laws. These weren't viewed as mystical or rebellious acts. They were just ordinary items in the medicine box, right beside the garlic and prayers. Ultimately, how these altered states were perceived depended heavily on who was involved, what substance was used, and whether anyone reported it. To the medieval mind, altered consciousness occupied a strange middle ground, somewhere between miracle and misdemeanor, health and heresy. And in a world where demons, saints, plagues, and turnip famines all coexisted, a bit of herbal escape from reality now and then wasn't considered the worst choice. Shifting to the ancient world, the sea wasn't merely a vast void to be feared. It was the very beating heart of empire. It ferried grain, gold, messages, soldiers, and occasionally war itself. Whoever controlled the seas didn't just rule over water. They dictated the fate of entire civilizations. Unlike battles on land, which were shaped by terrain, naval warfare was about controlling flow of trade, communication, and access. For great seafaring empires like Athens, Carthage, and Egypt, naval supremacy was not optional. It was a matter of survival. Without a strong fleet, cities faced isolation, starvation, and siege. With one, they could blockade enemies, guard merchant convoys, and even deploy forces far behind enemy lines. The Mediterranean Sea exemplifies this notion perfectly. Called the Middle Sea for good reason. It linked 3 continents and countless cultures. Dominating these waters meant holding a finger on the pulse of vital trade routes, from Phoenician merchants to Roman grain shipments. The sea could deliver riches as swiftly as it could bring ruin. This reality drove ancient powers to invest heavily in naval infrastructure, constructing harbors, shipyards, dry docks, and navies. For Athens in particular, its navy wasn't just a military asset. It became the very lifeblood of the city's power and prosperity. Imagine an ancient world where naval power was the heartbeat of empires and the key to dominance. This was the stage for some of history's most legendary sea battles. Athens, transformed into an unstoppable naval empire, wielded its famous trireme fleet to protect vital grain routes from Egypt, collect tribute from its allies, and decisively crush Persian ambitions in epic clashes like the Battle of Salamis. Across the Mediterranean, Carthage rose as a naval behemoth, transitioning from humble trading routes into a formidable maritime force. Their shipyards were technological marvels of the ancient era, almost industrial in scale, churning out warships with relentless efficiency. But Carthaginian power extended beyond just brute force at sea. It was their generations of expert sailors and navigators who knew the waves like the back of their hands that truly cemented their dominance. Further east, Egypt's strategic position at the mouth of the Nile and the Red Sea made naval strength essential. While primarily focused on riverine operations, Egyptian warships evolved into capable seafaring vessels, ready to combat rampant piracy and safeguard precious treasure fleets trading with the Levant and Nubia. In every case, from Athens to Carthage to Egypt, naval warfare wasn't a mere subplot. It was the decisive arena where rivalries played out, alliances shattered, and the fate of empires was sealed. Mastery over naval tactics, technology, and seas geography forged legends that are still told today. When fleets were lost or set ablaze, so too were the fortunes of great powers. At the center of this naval evolution was the trireme, a ship more than just a vessel. It was an ancient weapon of swift and deadly precision. Sleek and fast, it defined Mediterranean warfare. Many city-states built triremes, but none commanded them with the skill and strategic genius of the Athenians. This warship stretched roughly 120 feet in length, yet was only about 18 feet wide. Its narrow, streamlined hull allowed it to cut through water with minimal resistance. The shallow draft enabled it to maneuver close to coastlines, ideal for surprise raids and beach landings. The name trireme comes from its 3 tiers of oars stacked one above the other, each row manned by trained seamen who rowed in perfect unison. These oarsmen were no mere laborers. They were highly skilled individuals, capable of propelling their ship to battle speeds of up to 9 knots. But the trireme's deadliest feature was its bronze-clad ram, a prow reinforced with oak and designed to smash into enemy ships with brutal force. Successfully ramming an opponent required far more than speed. It demanded exact timing and precision. Hit the target too squarely, and the attacking ship risked becoming trapped or capsizing. Athenian captains mastered maneuvers like the diplas, a daring tactic where they would slip through enemy lines, swiftly pivot, and strike vulnerable flanks. Above deck, the trireme carried a small but formidable contingent of marines, typically 10 to 20 hoplites heavily armed for boarding actions or defense against enemy boarders, alongside a few archers for ranged support. However, despite its lethal arsenal, a trireme was no floating fortress. It emphasized speed and agility over armor. A single misstep could set the ship ablaze and spell disaster. What truly made Athens' naval power revolutionary wasn't merely the design of the trireme, but the impressive system that supported it. Funded by the Theorica, a public naval treasury, Athens built and sustained a fleet of hundreds of these swift vessels. It was an empire built on strategy, skill, and the relentless rhythm of oars cutting through the waves. In ancient naval warfare, it was often the poorest citizens who served as rowers, creating a unique form of democracy on the sea. When Athens triumphed over the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, it was not the aristocrats who secured victory, but the common people who rowed with determination and skill. Unlike the modern idea of naval combat dominated by cannon fire, ancient battles resembled high-speed games of chess, punctuated with moments of brutal melee. The primary aim was to disable or sink enemy ships before they could do the same to your own fleet. At the heart of naval strategy during the trireme era was the ram. This was a bronze-tipped prow designed to pierce an enemy ship's hull below the waterline. A well-placed ram strike could send a vessel to the ocean floor within minutes, but executing this was far from straightforward. It demanded precise timing, careful angling, and flawless coordination. Approach at too sharp an angle, and your ram would merely glance off harmlessly, too head-on, and you risk embedding your own ship into the enemy's, immobilizing both and making them vulnerable. To master this, fleets developed complex maneuvers like the dikeplaus and periplus. In the dikeplaus, a ship would thread quickly through gaps in the enemy line before pivoting to strike from behind. The periplus involved circling around the enemy formation to expose and ram their flanks. These tactics relied heavily on the synchronization of the rowers and the captain's strategic foresight, proving that ancient naval warfare was an art of precision, not just brute force. However, not every ram attempt was successful. Ships sometimes missed their targets or became entangled. When this happened, combat shifted from tactical strikes to raw hand-to-hand fighting, boarding. Boarding transformed the naval fight into something more akin to land combat. Once ships collided or locked together, Marines surged aboard armed with swords, spears, and shields. These encounters were far from orderly. Instead, they resembled fierce, chaotic brawls. Archers and slingers on the upper decks contributed to the mayhem by picking off exposed opponents. Over time, some navies, like the Romans, preferred boarding tactics over ramming. They even invented specialized equipment, such as the corvus, a boarding plank with a hooked spike designed to latch onto enemy vessels and turn battles at sea into brutal floating land fights. This strategy proved decisive during the First Punic War, allowing the Romans to overcome the more seasoned Carthaginian sailors by leveraging their superior infantry strength. Of course, boarding combat was savage and bloody with no room for retreat. Once the clash began, it was kill or be killed amid decks slick with salt water, blood, and shattered wood. If ramming was the precise scalpel of ancient naval warfare, then fire tactics served as the sledgehammer. Few sights were more terrifying than a flaming ship racing toward a fleet. A controlled chaos weapon so dangerous that it could threaten friends and foes alike. Though not as frequent as ramming or boarding actions, fire tactics appeared early and evolved over time. The concept was straightforward. Pack a ship with flammable materials like pitch, tar, sulfur, resin, and oil. Set it ablaze, and send it hurtling toward the enemy, hoping to ignite their vessels and cause widespread destruction. In the annals of naval warfare, the use of fire ships stands out as both a terrifying weapon and a risky strategy. D-Day. A fire ship was a vessel set ablaze and sent drifting toward tightly clustered enemy fleets with the intent to ignite sails, decks, and anything flammable in its path. One of the earliest recorded instances of deploying such incendiary tactics dates back to the Greco-Persian conflicts. Here, defenders desperate to thwart naval invasions hurled flaming rafts or boats toward enemy galleys, aiming to sow chaos. These attacks were especially effective in confined waters like harbors or narrow straits, where limited maneuverability meant a single fire ship could incite widespread panic and disrupt enemy formations. However, fire at sea was a dangerous double-edged sword. Winds shifting suddenly could send flames back toward one's own ships, turning a tactical weapon into a dire hazard. Because of this, fire ships were typically reserved for desperate moments, during blockades, surprise assaults, or last stands, when the high risk was deemed worth the potential havoc. Centuries later, the Byzantine Empire introduced the most advanced incarnation of ancient incendiary warfare, Greek fire. This enigmatic and formidable weapon could reportedly burn on water and resisted conventional extinguishing methods. Though Greek fire belongs more to the medieval era, it directly descended from ancient concepts of chemical fire used to establish naval dominance. Earlier civilizations like the Egyptians and Phoenicians also employed fire-based weapons in their fleets, using them especially against pirates and during sieges. Coastal defenders sometimes launched flaming pots or arrows onto ships attempting to breach harbor defenses, leveraging fire's devastating psychological impact. The fear that fire instilled among sailors was unparalleled. Unlike physical barriers that could be blocked or borders that could be defended, fire spread panic swiftly. It consumed wooden hulls and decks, and it traveled faster than orders could be shouted. Even seasoned sailors, upon smelling pitch and smoke, might abandon ship in a heartbeat. The 5th century BCE marked a transformative period for Athens. Once a primarily landlocked city-state, it evolved into a naval superpower, and this transformation began with an unexpected source. Silver. A rich silver vein was discovered in the Laurium mines, and the visionary Athenian politician Themistocles convinced his fellow citizens to invest the newfound wealth, not by dividing it but by funding the construction of a powerful fleet of triremes, light yet formidable warships. This decision altered the course of history. At its peak, Athens boasted over 200 warships, making its navy the backbone of what eventually became the Athenian Empire. The city's power shifted from relying on hoplite infantry and stone fortifications to domination through wood, sweat, and strategic naval prowess. The victory at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE stands as one of the most decisive naval engagements in ancient history. There, the Athenian fleet trapped and annihilated the invading Persian navy in narrow straits, a triumph that not only saved Athens but positioned it as the protector, and soon the ruler of the Aegean Sea. Through the Delian League, Athens began extracting tribute from allied city-states, ostensibly to fund mutual naval defense. Yet, in practice, much of this tribute was diverted to serve Athens' own ambitions, financing everything from shipbuilding to grand public architecture. The Athenian navy became the critical instrument through which the city enforced its growing dominance and pursued its imperial interests. Athens wielded its naval power not only to suppress rebellions and maintain loyalty across its territories, but also to extend its influence far beyond its borders. Yet, this dominance was about far more than raw military strength. The Athenian fleet played a transformative social role, democratizing the city-state in a way that reshaped its political landscape. The poorest citizens, those unable to afford armor or land necessary to serve as traditional hoplites, became indispensable as rowers in the triremes. Their vital contributions earned them political leverage and thereby empowered the lower classes, shifting the balance of power within the Athenian assembly. In this way, sea power evolved into a form of people power, giving the common citizen a stake in the city's empire. But this naval supremacy came at a significant cost. Athens' heavy reliance on its fleet and the coercive manner in which it treated its allies bred deep resentment. During the protracted Peloponnesian War, Sparta, historically a dominant land power, capitalized on Persian financial support to construct its own fleet. This newly forged Spartan navy ultimately dealt a crushing blow to Athens at the Battle of Aegospotami in 405 BCE. With its fleet destroyed, Athens was cut off from vital grain supplies and forced to surrender. Still, the enduring legacy of Athenian naval power is undeniable. It demonstrated that a city-state with limited territory could achieve imperial dominance through mastery of the seas, proving that naval forces could wield political as well as military influence. Meanwhile, in the western Mediterranean, Carthage stood as the unrivaled maritime power. Founded by Phoenician settlers around 800 BCE, in what is now Tunisia, Carthage expanded its influence not through territorial conquest alone, but through trade, seafaring expertise, and groundbreaking naval innovation. By the 4th century BCE, Carthage was no mere city. It served as the vital hub of an extensive maritime network stretching from Spain to Sicily and from North Africa to Sardinia. Carthaginian strength hinged on its fleet, which went beyond the Athenian model of the trireme to push naval engineering to unprecedented, almost industrial levels. With massive shipyards, including the enormous circular harbor at Carthage, they could build and maintain hundreds of warships simultaneously. This wasn't just theoretical capability. Carthage operated an assembly line-style dock system that facilitated the rapid construction and repair of vessels, an innovation unmatched in the ancient world. Their warships, often quadriremes or quinquiremes, were larger and heavier than Athenian triremes, engineered not only for speed but for raw power. Their naval tactics emphasized ramming enemy ships and boarding them with seasoned mercenary marines and Libyan Phoenician sailors, adept seafarers who had grown up with the sea as their classroom. Carthage's maritime power was not just about military might. It underpinned an expansive commercial empire. Carthaginian merchants plied the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa, trading valuable commodities such as tin and silver, while bringing back rare and exotic goods. The Navy safeguarded these trade routes, working tirelessly to fend off pirates, rival traders, and ever-encroaching Roman ambitions that threatened their prosperity. This maritime prowess set the stage for the epic Punic Wars. As Rome ascended on the Italian peninsula, it understood that toppling Carthage required building a formidable navy from scratch. When Roman forces captured a stranded Carthaginian quinquireme, they painstakingly reverse-engineered it, adding the ingenious corvus, a boarding ramp that negated Carthage's superior seamanship by converting sea engagements into close-quarters combat, akin to land battles. Despite suffering early defeats, Carthage mounted fierce resistance under brilliant naval commanders, demonstrating tactical brilliance that prolonged the struggle. In the First Punic War, Carthaginian forces fought dozen after dozen of intense sea battles, maintaining their hold on the western Mediterranean, even as Rome's naval innovation began to tip the scales. Throughout history, Carthage proved its mastery of naval warfare with numerous decisive sea battles. One of the most remarkable was at Trapana, where Carthaginian commanders executed a flawless tactical maneuver that obliterated a larger Roman fleet. This stunning victory demonstrated that Carthage's strategic brilliance on the seas remained formidable despite being outnumbered. However, over time, sheer numbers began to prevail. The Romans' relentless determination, superior supply chains, and harsh discipline gradually shifted the balance of power in their favor. By the conclusion of the Second Punic War, Carthage's once formidable fleet had been completely destroyed, their shipyards dismantled, and their maritime influence shattered. Yet, the story of Carthaginian dominance at sea continues to captivate historians and enthusiasts alike. Carthage was not simply a naval warrior. It was a civilization of masterful merchants, inventive shipbuilders, and intrepid navigators. They ruled the waters through a combination of intelligence, wealth, and the craftsmanship of wood, leaving an enduring legacy in the annals of maritime history. When we envision ancient Egypt, we tend to picture grand pyramids, powerful pharaohs, and majestic temples, not fleets of ships. However, Egypt was among the earliest civilizations to embrace naval power, both on the mighty Nile River and in the open sea. Though their vessels might not have gained the same fame as Greek triremes or Carthaginian quinquiremes, Egyptian watercraft played a crucial role over thousands of years. They were essential for maintaining the empire, transporting soldiers, and safeguarding vital economic routes. The Nile served as Egypt's main thoroughfare, a lifeblood that connected the northern delta with southern regions and arid deserts. As early as 3000 BCE, Egyptian shipbuilders crafted boats from bundled papyrus reeds, which later evolved into sturdier craft fashioned from cedarwood imported from Lebanon. These riverboats bore not only grain and gold, but also soldiers, and even gigantic statues, ferrying them efficiently along the river's winding course. Egyptian pharaohs led daring naval expeditions southward into Nubia, and eastward across the Red Sea to the fabled land of Punt, known for its riches in incense, ivory, and exotic wildlife. Egypt's naval ambitions extended well beyond the riverbanks. During the New Kingdom period, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE, Egypt developed seagoing fleets capable of confronting pirates, repelling invasions, and asserting power overseas. Under formidable rulers like Thutmose III and Ramesses III, Egyptian warships engaged in battles against the Sea Peoples, a confederation of marauders threatening the eastern Mediterranean. These engagements are vividly depicted in reliefs at Medinet Habu, showing Egyptian archers launching volleys from vessel decks and marines locked in fierce hand-to-hand combat upon narrow wooden platforms. Unlike the nimble Greek triremes, Egyptian ships were broad, sail-driven vessels with limited maneuverability. They often featured raised fighting platforms and were manned by crews consisting of archers, spearmen, and sailors, skilled in both warfare and navigation. Their chief advantage lay in their ability to move swiftly along coastlines and rivers, permitting rapid deployment of troops and the interception of merchant vessels. Egypt's naval power was also a backbone of its economy. Grain exports to regions like the Levant were protected by escort ships, and robust trade with the Aegean world was secured by naval patrols. Ports such as Byblos and Tanis grew into vital centers of commerce and naval logistics. Egyptian shipbuilders earned a reputation for exceptional craftsmanship, attracting commissions from foreign rulers eager to benefit from their skills. Over centuries, Egypt's naval dominance declined under successive foreign dominions: the Libyans, Assyrians, Persians, and ultimately the Greeks and Romans. Nevertheless, Egypt's long-standing tradition of riverine and coastal warfare established foundational practices that influenced naval traditions in the ancient world for generations to come. In the ancient Near East, while Egypt's ships never truly commanded the open sea, they held sway over the pulse of empire, navigating the Nile's currents, riding the winds where they could, and traveling wherever power demanded. When the Roman Republic began its ascent, it was not yet a maritime force. Rome's true strength lay on land. Its disciplined legions and remarkable road-building transformed the peninsula, yet naval prowess was not its forte. That would soon change in a remarkable and swift transformation during a bitter rivalry for control of the Mediterranean with the seasoned maritime power of Carthage. At the dawn of the First Punic War in 264 BCE, Rome possessed virtually no fleet, while Carthage enjoyed centuries of naval dominance. Undeterred, Roman determination led to a legendary breakthrough. They seized a Carthaginian quinquereme, using it as a blueprint. Within mere months, through immense manpower and state organization, Rome constructed a vast navy, assembling hundreds of ships. Yet Rome recognized it could not simply outmatch Carthage's experienced sailors on their own terms. So Rome redefined naval warfare. They introduced the corvus, a boarding bridge with a metal spike that changed the nature of sea battles. Instead of traditional naval maneuvers, this device allowed Roman marines to storm enemy ships en masse, turning sea combat into infantry warfare, a domain where Romans excelled. This innovation was a game-changer. At battles such as Mylae and Cape Ignamus, Rome's relatively inexperienced sailors outperformed Carthage's veterans through aggressive boarding tactics enabled by the corvus. Although the corvus was eventually abandoned, its weight made ships unstable. It had already decisively shifted the war's momentum. By the time of the Second Punic War, Rome's naval capabilities had matured significantly. Its fleets cruised the western Mediterranean, safeguarding supply lines to Iberia and Africa, and hampering Hannibal's efforts to reinforce his armies from Carthage. Naval blockades and amphibious assaults had become standard strategy, integrating sea power into Rome's military machine. Under the Roman Empire, control of the seas expanded even further. The classi Missinensis and classi Ravenatis were among the primary imperial fleets tasked with protecting vital trade routes, suppressing piracy, and ferrying troops. Although the navy often stayed behind the scenes compared to the legions, it was essential for logistics and strategy, binding the empire's vast territories into a cohesive whole. Unlike maritime powers such as Athens or Carthage, Rome never embraced a distinct maritime identity. The sea was a tool, an element to be mastered when needed, not a defining aspect of Roman culture. Nevertheless, by the 1st century CE, Mare Nostrum, our sea, was more than a boast. It was an established reality. Born on land, but destined for mastery over waters, Rome transformed what once was a strategic vulnerability into an unparalleled maritime fortress. Ancient naval warfare did more than influence battles. It shaped borders, economies, and empires, weaving itself into the cultural fabric. Across the Mediterranean and beyond, domination of the seas meant controlling more than just water. It meant sovereignty over the flow of ideas, trade, languages, and power structures that defined civilization itself. Let's take a deep dive into the profound influence of navies throughout history, effects that still reverberate centuries later. Imagine the ancient world, where the might of a fleet could shape entire civilizations. Consider Athens, which rose to prominence not just through its armies, but because of its formidable naval power. This fleet didn't merely defend its city, it projected Athenian culture, commerce, and influence across the Mediterranean, transforming Athens into a vibrant cultural and economic hub. Then look at Carthage, whose maritime mastery built a mercantile empire that dominated trade routes and spread influence across vast distances. Though Rome was initially a latecomer to naval affairs, it swiftly seized control of the Mediterranean Sea. Rome's supremacy at sea became the backbone for controlling territories far beyond its borders, enabling it to strike at enemies, secure distant lands, and cut off rival economies. While these powers boasted armies on land, it was their fleets that truly expanded their reach, granting them the ability to operate across continents and oceans. The sea was much more than a battlefield. It acted as a vital cultural bridge. Greek settlers sailed across the waters, founding colonies in Italy and Asia Minor, carrying with them art, religion, and language that seeded new societies. Egyptian vessels transported papyrus, gold, and sacred knowledge to foreign rulers, enriching courts far from the Nile. Phoenician sailors stand out as cultural ambassadors too, spreading not just their advanced alphabet, but also their deities to nearly every shore where their ships docked. Naval power then was never purely a military pursuit. It was a civilizational force that intertwined culture, commerce, and conquest. Technological innovation thrived in ancient navies. The development of the trireme and subsequent larger polyam signified more than just advances in warfare. They revolutionized shipbuilding and engineering. Harbors evolved into bustling logistical centers, enabling massive fleets to be supplied and maintained. Navigational techniques advanced, allowing sailors to voyage farther and with greater precision. Moreover, the adoption of standardized ship designs laid a foundation for maritime architecture, influences that persisted through Byzantine and Islamic naval traditions. The economic landscape also shifted dramatically due to naval developments. Protected sea lanes made possible steady, long-distance trade routes where rare and luxurious goods, like silks from the East, exotic spices, fine wines, and tin, flowed between disparate cultures. Cities endowed with strong fleets, such as Alexandria, blossomed into wealthy cosmopolitan centers, becoming magnets for artists, scholars, and even revolutionaries. Where navies thrived, vibrant markets and vibrant societies followed. Naval warfare additionally left an indelible psychological mark. Tactics involving fireships, ramming maneuvers, and boarding actions not only played practical roles in battles, but also shaped the imagination of warfare itself. They introduced a transformative concept. The sea was a weapon in its own right. Victory depended not just on sheer force, but on mobility, control of the waves, and clever strategy. Though modern memory often celebrates ancient conquests on land, the supremacy of these empires at sea was equally, if not more, influential and enduring. Ancient naval warfare was more than a contest of speed or raw power. It was a sophisticated dance that turned the sea into a theater of history. Even though the era of the triremes has long passed, their legacy continues to ripple through our understanding of warfare and civilization. Shifting our focus to Persia, let's look at Cyrus the Great, born around 600 BCE in Ankon, then a vassal kingdom under Median dominance. The Achaemenid family, to which Cyrus belonged, claimed noble heritage and governed a small but respected Persian domain. Yet, nothing about his early years suggested that he would go on to establish one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen. Despite this, legends quickly grew around Cyrus. The Greek historian Herodotus offers one of the most dramatic origin tales in ancient biography. According to legend, King Ios of Media, Cyrus's grandfather, had a haunting dream that foretold his downfall at the hands of his daughter's son. The royal interpreters confirmed his worst fear. This child would become a threat to his throne. In response, Astyages, the king, initiated actions based on this prophecy, setting the stage for a saga that would reshape history. The story begins with a Median king, Astyages, who arranged the marriage of his daughter Mandane to a noble Persian named Cambyses. Confident that the child born of this union would remain politically insignificant, he underestimated the powerful destiny awaiting the baby. When Cyrus was born, Astyages grew anxious due to unsettling dreams that foreshadowed danger. To eliminate any possible threat, he commanded his trusted servant Harpagus to execute the infant. However, Harpagus, unwilling to carry out such a cruel task himself, passed the grim duty to a shepherd. Instead of abandoning or killing the child, the shepherd made a bold choice. He raised Cyrus as his own son, hiding him away in the remote mountains, and raising him as a simple herder boy. As Cyrus grew, something extraordinary began to emerge. Even as a young boy, he radiated a natural charisma that set him apart from his peers. He effortlessly took charge among other children, showing a leadership that belied his years. Inevitably, whispers reached the royal court about a mysterious noble child living incognito as a shepherd. Astyages launched an investigation, eventually uncovering the boy's true identity. In a surprising turn, instead of condemning Cyrus, the king chose to spare him. Whether this was due to underestimating Cyrus' threat, or a pang of guilt remains unclear. However, Harpagus did not escape punishment. In a horrific act of retribution, Astyages killed Harpagus' son, and served him to his father as a meal at court, a dark warning to those who defied the king. Meanwhile, Cyrus was formally taken back into the fold of nobility, sent to live with his father Cambyses in Persia, where he was recognized as a prince. Unbeknownst to Astyages, this act of mercy and exile only sealed his own fate. Cyrus' time among shepherds and nobles alike granted him a deep understanding of both the humble and the powerful, shaping a leader who could bridge worlds. Whether Herodotus' account is fully accurate or a blend of myth and fact, the tale captures the aura of destiny that has forever surrounded Cyrus the Great. From a precarious infancy marked by near death to a remarkable survival, his early life planted the seeds for a greatness that would soon challenge and redefine the entire concept of kingship. By the middle of the 6th century BCE, Cyrus was no longer simply a Persian prince. He had evolved into a shrewd and ambitious leader, ready to shake up the established order. At the time, the Median Empire, ruled by King Astyages, wielded dominant control over Persia. But the winds of change were blowing, and Cyrus stood prepared to capitalize on them. The spark that ignited this transformation was betrayal that cut deep. Multiple sources, including Herodotus and Babylonian chronicles, tell how Harpagus, the same general who had been ordered years before to kill baby Cyrus, never forgot the brutal fate inflicted on his son. Years later, positioned with influence, Harpagus covertly reached out to Cyrus, encouraging rebellion and promising support from within Median ranks. This secret alliance heralded the beginning of a revolt that would reverberate across the ancient world. Around 553 BCE, Cyrus openly defied Median authority, declaring Persia's independence and initiating a war that wasn't settled in a single battle, but spanned several campaigns over 3 years. His forces steadily advanced into Median lands, drawing support from disillusioned noble factions and regional allies. Cyrus earned a reputation not only for his military skill, but also for his remarkable clemency. He often spared the lives of enemies who surrendered, which both instilled fear and commanded admiration. Meanwhile, King Astyages' court was fracturing as loyalty crumbled under the pressure. When the decisive confrontation arrived in 550 BCE, it was not the Medes who prevailed, but Cyrus and his forces who claimed victory, forever altering the political landscape of the region. Betrayed from within by his own army, the once mighty Median Empire collapsed almost overnight. When Cyrus entered Ecbatana, the Median capital, he did so not as a ruthless conqueror, but as a visionary new kind of ruler. He demonstrated respect for local customs, maintained Median administrative systems, and welcomed many Medes into his expanding government. This inclusive approach would become a defining feature of his reign. With Media securely under his control, Cyrus succeeded in unifying the entire Iranian plateau. But this was far from the end. It was just the beginning. By overthrowing the Medes, Cyrus not only freed Persia from their subjugation, but also inherited their vast empire. His domain now stretched from what is modern-day Iran to parts of Central Asia. Riding high on this remarkable victory, Cyrus the Great set his sights westward toward the fabulously wealthy kingdom of Lydia, ruled by the legendary King Croesus. Croesus was no ordinary monarch. He was among the richest men of his era, his name synonymous with incredible wealth. His capital, Sardis, dazzled with opulence, and his armies were formidable, equipped with cavalry and seasoned soldiers. Yet Croesus made one critical mistake. He underestimated Cyrus. Hoping to halt Persian expansion, Croesus forged alliances with Egypt and Babylon and sought counsel from the Oracle of Delphi. The oracle famously warned him that if he crossed the river to attack Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Taking this as a good omen, Croesus launched an invasion, only to find that the empire he doomed to ruin was his own. The decisive confrontation took place near the Halys River in 547 BCE. After a fiercely fought battle, Croesus retreated to Sardis, believing the fighting season had ended, and that he could safely regroup in the spring with his allies. But Cyrus defied expectations. He pursued relentlessly. In an audacious winter campaign, Cyrus laid siege to Sardis, forcing Croesus into a desperate defense. According to Herodotus, Cyrus even employed a clever, tactical surprise. He used camels to unnerve the Lydian cavalry, Croesus's strongest military asset, rendering them ineffective. Within weeks, Sardis fell. Croesus was captured alive, but what followed sealed Cyrus's reputation as a remarkably humane ruler. Instead of executing Croesus, Cyrus reportedly spared his life and even made him an advisor. The story goes that as Croesus stood on the verge of being burned alive, he cried out the name of Solon, the famed Greek philosopher who warned him never to call a man fortunate until his life's true end was known. Moved by this wisdom and the tale's poignancy, Cyrus ordered the flames to be extinguished. Whether fact or legend, this tale perfectly captures Cyrus's known policy of mercy. With Lydia conquered, Cyrus gained control over vast treasuries and lucrative trade networks, as well as the powerful Greek city-states of Ionia along the Aegean coast. Although the Ionian cities resisted Persian rule, they were no match for Cyrus's rapidly expanding military strength and diplomatic skill. The fall of Croesus marked more than just the collapse of a wealthy kingdom. It confirmed Cyrus's tactical genius and his rare blend of military might and mercy. It also gave Persia a critical foothold in the region, setting the stage for further expansion and the shaping of an empire that would influence the ancient world for centuries to come. Let's set the scene in the Greek world, a backdrop primed for the very conflicts that would later ripple across east and west. Into this arena stepped Cyrus the Great, whose ambitions were anything but small. By the late 540s BCE, his empire had already expanded dramatically, and yet one formidable obstacle stood between him and uncontested control over the Near East, Babylon. Once ruled by legendary kings like Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar Saqqat, Babylon was a city of immense grandeur, famed for its towering ziggurats, massive double walls, and the legendary hanging gardens. However, beneath this striking facade, signs of internal decay were surfacing. At this time, Babylon was under the rule of King Nabonidus, a leader who had lost favor with his own people. His religious reforms had deeply alienated the influential priesthood of Marduk, the city's chief deity, sowing the seeds of unrest. Furthermore, Nabonidus' prolonged absences from Babylon left governance to his son Belshazzar, a figure familiar to readers of the Hebrew Bible. Dissatisfaction and unrest simmered throughout the city, and Cyrus was quick to perceive a golden opportunity. In 539 BCE, Cyrus launched a campaign against Babylon, but this was no typical invasion characterized by siege and destruction. Instead, it was a precise, strategic strike. His forces defeated Babylonian troops at Opis, a critical stronghold on the Tigris River. Victory was achieved not merely through military might, but also through skillful propaganda. The Persians crafted a message promising liberation from the failed and unpopular reign of Nabonidus, positioning Cyrus as the restorer of divine order. The most remarkable moment came when Cyrus entered Babylon without a single battle. According to the Nabonidus Chronicle and later Greek accounts, Babylon's gates opened to him. Whether through cunning negotiation or internal betrayal, the result was clear. Cyrus marched into the city as a liberator rather than a conqueror. He treated the city's temples with respect, took part in religious ceremonies, and famously declared in the Cyrus Cylinder that Marduk himself had chosen him to restore peace and justice. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay artifact inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, is often celebrated as the world's first charter of human rights. While modern scholars debate this characterization, the document undeniably offers a revolutionary window into Cyrus' vision of power, as stewardship rather than mere domination. In it, Cyrus proclaims divine selection by Marduk to correct the misgovernment of Nabonidus. Yet, this was no empty rhetoric. Cyrus acted decisively to restore temples, uphold religious traditions, and support displaced peoples in returning to their homelands. Among the most notable beneficiaries were the Jews exiled years earlier from Jerusalem by Babylonian kings. Cyrus' edict permitted them to return home and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, an event so impactful that the Hebrew Bible refers to him as God's anointed, a title customarily reserved for Israelite monarchs. Consequently, after entering Babylon in 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great didn't simply seize a throne. He transformed the very concept of empire building. The policies he enacted, carefully recorded in artifacts like the Cyrus Cylinder, illustrated a new approach to ruling, one grounded in tolerance, restoration of religious sites, and respect for the cultures and faiths of the diverse peoples within his vast realm. Cyrus the Great's approach to ruling his vast empire was nothing short of revolutionary for his time. Rather than imposing harsh control or demanding assimilation, he chose a path of respect and tolerance toward the diverse peoples under his reign. In his famous decree, he explicitly promised not to oppress his subjects or alter their local traditions, signaling a new kind of leadership. One of the most celebrated manifestations of this policy was the liberation of the Jewish people from their Babylonian exile. After decades of captivity, they were permitted to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple that had been destroyed. The Book of Ezra in the Hebrew Bible records Cyrus's decree, portraying him as an instrument of divine will. Remarkably, the only non-Jew mentioned in the Bible as a Messiah or anointed one. The Cyrus Cylinder further amplifies this philosophy by emphasizing themes of freedom, restoration, and rightful governance through justice. This stands in stark contrast to the typical declarations of ancient rulers, who often glorified their conquests and the destruction they wrought. Instead of celebrating military victories or the subjugation of peoples, Cyrus highlights his role as a protector of different cultures and faiths. This was not a sign of weakness, but a calculated strategy. By honoring the customs of the diverse groups within his empire, Cyrus minimized uprisings and cultivated loyalty across the territories he controlled. Certainly we must be cautious not to overlay modern legal ideas on this ancient artifact. Yet, the spirit embodied in the Cyrus Cylinder is extraordinary. It imagines a world where rulers earn legitimacy not through intimidation, but through kindness and inclusion. Today, a replica of the cylinder is proudly displayed at the United Nations headquarters, symbolizing its enduring significance as an early model of pluralistic governance. Cyrus did more than just expand his empire's borders. He held together an incredibly complex mosaic of peoples: the Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Elamites, Lydians, Hebrews, and many others, each with their own languages, religions, customs, and grievances. What elevated Cyrus to greatness was less his territorial conquests, and more his deft management of these internal complexities. Central to his rule was a philosophy that combined tolerance with structured governance. Unlike many ancient rulers who imposed their own culture and religious practices, Cyrus adopted a decentralized system. He permitted local rulers to stay in power, allowed indigenous religions to thrive, and let customs continue unhindered. Instead of crushing his subjects through force, he aimed to win their trust and cooperation, an approach that proved remarkably effective. Furthermore, Cyrus preserved and adapted existing administrative frameworks developed by the Medes and Babylonians, fusing them with Persian innovation to create a uniquely adaptable empire. Local authority was entrusted to satraps, or provincial governors, who managed taxation, security, and justice within their regions. These officials were often drawn from local elites, but remained accountable to the central authority under Cyrus. This balanced system became the cornerstone of imperial governance for generations. Cyrus also recognized the critical importance of economic stability. He invested in infrastructure, enhanced trade routes, protected caravans, and ensured merchants were treated fairly. He understood that a thriving economy was as crucial to the empire's endurance as its military prowess. Thus, under his guidance, the empire was not merely a war machine, but also a vibrant commercial and cultural network, unified by mutual respect and pragmatic governance. Cyrus the Great forged a cultural network that stretched from the Indus Valley all the way to the Iron Sea, a vast expanse that showcased his vision of empire building. But it wasn't just military conquest that defined him. Cyrus was deeply aware of the power of symbolism. In every city he took, he made deliberate gestures of respect, restoring temples, actively participating in local religious ceremonies, and preserving existing institutions. These acts went beyond simple displays. They were carefully crafted diplomatic strategies that earned him the loyalty of those who had once been his enemies. What is truly remarkable about Cyrus's reign is the surprising lack of resistance it provoked. He didn't merely avoid uprisings. He frequently inspired admiration among the very people he ruled over. Even the Greeks, who usually viewed so-called barbarians with disdain, praised him as a wise and just king. The Athenian historian Xenophon was so impressed that he wrote the Cyropaedia, a partly fictionalized but deeply respectful biography presenting Cyrus as a model of enlightened leadership. By the end of his reign, Cyrus the Great had reshaped the ancient world. His empire stretched farther than any before it, from the Iron Sea to the towering mountains of Central Asia. Yet, like many great conquerors, his ambition was not yet sated. He set his sights on one final campaign, to the northeastern steppes. This would be the campaign that eventually claimed his life. Around 530 BCE, Cyrus embarked on this last journey to confront the Magi, a confederation of fierce nomadic tribes east of the Caspian Sea. These horse-riding warriors were led by Queen Thamyris, a leader remembered both for her military prowess and as a symbol of defiance. The Persians regarded her people as uncivilized but dangerous, a serious threat to the borders of the burgeoning empire. The details of this campaign are clouded by time and myth, largely shaped by Herodotus's dramatic, and often embellished, account. According to this Greek historian, Cyrus first sought diplomacy, proposing marriage to Queen Thamyris. She, however, saw through this political maneuver. When negotiations failed, Cyrus turned to deception. He left behind a lavish banquet filled with wine and rich food, knowing the Magi were unaccustomed to alcohol. After a drunken celebration, many of Thamyris' warriors were ambushed and brutally killed, including her son. Devastated and enraged, Thamyris vowed revenge. In the ensuing climactic battle, The mage overwhelmed the Persian forces. Cyrus was killed in combat. Herodotus goes further, claiming that Tomyris had Cyrus's body decapitated and his severed head placed in a skin filled with blood, telling him, "Drink your fill of blood, you who thirsted for it." While this gruesome detail may lean more toward myth than fact, what remains certain is that Cyrus died far from the great cities he had once conquered. Eventually, his body was returned to Pasargadae, the capital city he had established, and buried in a modest but dignified tomb. That tomb still stands today, a lasting testament to his extraordinary legacy. Cyrus' death marked the end of an era. The throne passed to his son, Cambyses II, who would continue expanding the empire, most notably into Egypt. But the unique combination of tolerance, military strategy, and visionary leadership that Cyrus embodied was not easily replicated. When Cyrus the Great died, he left behind much more than a vast empire. He left a political blueprint and a philosophical precedent that would influence generations to come. Cyrus the Great earned a legacy so enduring that even centuries after his reign, his name continued to inspire awe and respect. The empire he founded, known as the Achaemenid Empire, was the largest the world had ever seen up to that era, stretching expansively from the Ionian coast in the west all the way to the Indus River in the east. Yet, the significance of Cyrus's empire lay not merely in its vast size, but in how effectively it was governed. His groundbreaking policies promoting inclusion, tolerance, and administrative innovation laid the foundation for an enduring imperial system. These principles were upheld and expanded upon by his successors, including his son Cambyses II and later Darius the Great, who not only extended the empire's boundaries, but also formalized its governance. One of the key innovations introduced by Cyrus was the satrapy system. Satraps, or regional governors, were appointed to oversee provinces, tasked with maintaining law and order, collecting taxes, and ensuring loyalty to the king. This decentralized administration allowed the empire to function efficiently despite its enormous size. Moreover, the Persian rulers maintained official policies of religious and cultural freedom, respecting local customs and honoring the temples and deities across diverse regions, from the towering ziggurats of Babylon to the sanctuaries of Egypt. Local elites often remained in power under Persian oversight, which contributed to the relative peace and scarcity of rebellions during the empire's early years. This peace was not maintained solely by force. Rather, many subjects saw Persian rule as more just and less oppressive than the regimes that had preceded it. Beyond policy and governance, Cyrus transformed the concept of kingship itself. He did not see the role of king simply as a position of political power, but embraced it as a moral responsibility. He took grand titles such as King of the Four Corners of the World, yet his legitimacy was deeply linked to the well-being of his subjects, a philosophy starkly different from the boastful tyranny of earlier rulers. This ideological shift emphasized that good governance was integral to true greatness. Cyrus's influence endured long after his death. His tomb, located at Pasargadae and constructed from simple limestone, remains a testament to his humility and lasting presence. Centuries later, Alexander the Great, himself a legendary conqueror, visited Cyrus's tomb, paying homage and even ordering its restoration after it had been desecrated, underscoring Cyrus's lasting impact across time. In Persia, Cyrus was revered not only as a great founder, but as a symbol of justice and the father of the nation. Later, Persian dynasties invoked his legacy to bolster their own claims to power, while Zoroastrian priests linked him to divine justice. His role in shaping Iranian national identity remains central to this day. Yet Cyrus's legacy transcended Persia's borders and cultures. In the Hebrew Bible, he is portrayed not merely as a foreign conqueror, but as a divinely appointed liberator. The book of Isaiah refers to him as the anointed of the Lord, a title traditionally reserved for Israelite kings, highlighting the unique respect afforded to him. His decree permitting the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple marks, a pivotal moment in Jewish history. For many, he stands as a righteous Gentile, a rare example of a powerful ruler who wielded his authority to restore, rather than destroy, faith and freedom. Even in Greece, despite a history of conflict with Persia, Cyrus was often regarded as a model monarch. His legacy as a just and effective ruler resonated across cultures long after the empire he built had faded from political power, solidifying his place as a globally admired figure whose example echoed through the ages. Xenophon, an Athenian writer and a student of Socrates, authored the Cyropaedia, a partly fictionalized narrative chronicling the life of Cyrus the Great. In this work, Cyrus is depicted as the embodiment of the ideal ruler: wise, just, moderate, and courageous. While the Cyropaedia is not considered a strict historical biography, it profoundly influenced Hellenistic and Roman perspectives on leadership and ethics for many centuries. Moving beyond the Greco-Roman world, Islamic tradition also holds Cyrus in high esteem. Some scholars and commentators have identified him with Dul-Qarnayn, or the two-horned one, a figure mentioned in the Quran described as a righteous king who constructed a great wall to shield people from chaos and injustice. Although this identification remains a subject of scholarly debate, it highlights the enduring respect Cyrus commands within Abrahamic religious traditions. The legacy of Cyrus has also inspired modern historians and political leaders. Notably, in 1776, Thomas Jefferson reportedly kept a copy of Xenophon's Cyropaedia by his bedside, drawing lessons from it. In the 20th century, Iran's last Shah invoked the image of Cyrus as a powerful symbol of national unity and reform. Today, the Cyrus cylinder, often hailed as the world's first declaration of human rights, is displayed prominently at the United Nations as a beacon of tolerance and enlightened governance. Cyrus' enduring appeal goes far beyond mere conquest. He is remembered not simply as a conqueror or empire builder, but as a sovereign who wielded power with a rare sense of justice and fairness. His reign demonstrated that an empire need not suppress cultural differences to maintain order, and that rulers can secure loyalty through respect rather than fear. More than 2,000 years later, Cyrus the Great remains a compelling paradox, a conqueror celebrated for his compassion, a king revered even by those he subjugated. Few figures in history enjoy such universal admiration, and fewer still merit it as profoundly. Shifting focus to ancient Egypt, under the blazing sun of the Nile Valley, the Egyptians made a distinctive and bold choice. They shaved their heads. This was not merely to survive the heat. It was a powerful symbol, a blank slate upon which elaborate wigs were displayed, some of the most intricate and admired in the ancient world. These wigs were not simply fashionable accessories. They functioned as vital markers of identity, status, and purity. Men and women of high rank didn't just wear wigs, they showcased them proudly. Constructed from real human hair, imported horsehair, or finely woven plant fibers, these wigs could be masterpieces of craftsmanship. Wealthy elites often commissioned wigs featuring multiple layers, intricate braids, gold beads, and even scented wax cones placed atop. These wax cones would melt under the sun, releasing luxurious perfumes that enveloped the wearer in an aura of opulence. For women, hairstyles and wigs were deeply intertwined with notions of femininity, fertility, and power. A noblewoman's wig might be adorned with delicate floral decorations, colorful bands, or precious metal clasps. Priestesses often wore wigs styled in tight, symmetrical rows that symbolized the divine order of the gods. For men, especially those serving Pharaoh, A thick, stylized wig was more than a sign of wealth. It denoted closeness to the divine hierarchy. Children in ancient Egypt followed a unique style tradition known as the sidelock of youth. Their heads would be shaved save for one ornate braid left dangling. This symbolized childhood, and the braid would be cut off during rites of passage as they transitioned into adulthood. During adulthood, hair customs often marked significant milestones, such as religious rites of passage. Contrast this with the bold priests who, to uphold ritual purity, shaved their entire bodies including their heads. Yet when participating in public ceremonies, even these priests donned ceremonial wigs. These wigs symbolized their spiritual roles rather than their personal identity, highlighting hair's cultural and symbolic versatility. What adds even more intrigue is how wigs played a role beyond life. Mummies were frequently interred with wigs intact, a practice believed to preserve their status and beauty into the afterlife. This reinforces the idea that hair was far more than mere vanity. It represented an eternal identity that transcended mortality. If you picture a Viking, you probably envision wild beards and intricately braided hair, a vision shaped equally by archaeology, Norse sagas, and Hollywood portrayals. However, there's a profound truth behind this image. Viking hairstyles were deliberate and deeply symbolic. Hair was a powerful emblem of identity, masculinity, clan loyalty, and even seduction within Norse society. Both Viking men and women invested care and meaning in their hair. In a society where physical appearance expressed strength and honor, long hair wasn't frivolous. It was a proclamation. Men would often grow their hair long and style it with great precision. Braids, top knots, and half-shaved heads served purposes beyond aesthetics. They were intimidating emblems of readiness and courage. A warrior entering battle with neatly braided locks and a thick beard wasn't just ensuring practicality, like keeping hair from his eyes. He was boldly signaling his readiness to fight and his defiance in the face of fear. For Viking women, hair held equally significant symbolism. Long, well-kept hair indicated femininity and high status. Women braided their hair into intricate patterns, often weaving ribbons or beads into the strands. Marital status was communicated through hair coverings or particular styles, much like the way wedding rings function in modern times. Scandinavian burial sites often contain combs, hairpins, and grooming tools, illustrating that daily hair care and personal pride mattered deeply to individuals of both genders. Interestingly, Viking laws incorporated hair into their systems of justice. Cutting someone's hair without consent was a severe insult, one that could trigger revenge, legal penalties, or even escalate into blood feuds. Because hair symbolized honor, forcibly severing it attacked a warrior's social standing and personal dignity. Norse mythology further elevates hair's significance. The gods themselves were recognized by iconic hairstyles. Thor with his fiery red beard, and Loki, whose transformations frequently involved sudden changes in hair or shape. The goddess Sif's golden hair was so renowned that when Loki mischievously severed it, he desperately sought the dwarves to craft a magical golden replacement. In this divine realm, hair functioned as a form of celestial currency, much more than a mortal feature. Similarly striking is the Roman approach to hairstyles, tightly intertwined with politics, class, and gender norms. In such a society where social order was rigorously maintained, hair emerged as one of the most subtle yet potent tools of social control and expression. Let's explore the powerful symbolism of hair in ancient societies, where your hairstyle could vividly express your identity, beliefs, and ambitions, especially within elite circles. Take Roman men, for example. In the early Republic, the ideal Roman citizen was clean-cut, conservative, and practical. Their hair was short, neat, and meticulously groomed. Anything longer was viewed with suspicion, seen as effeminate, foreign, or even indicative of laziness. A short haircut paired with a clean-shaven face wasn't merely about aesthetics. It was a profound civic declaration. It announced, "I'm disciplined. I serve the state. I am Roman." But as the Roman Empire advanced, styles blossomed into more elaborate expressions. Emperors, such as Nero and Commodus, flaunted curls styled flamboyantly, emulating Greek philosophers or divine statues. Some men wore what we now identify as the Roman topknot, a carefully crafted raised section of curled or layered hair at the front, sculpted to suggest youth, intellect, or refinement. These hairstyles were deliberate, orchestrated public images. Hair had become a form of propaganda. For Roman women, hair carried even greater significance, often becoming architectural feats in themselves. Consider the renowned Flavian Tower hairstyle, a literal mountain of curls and braids meticulously pinned high atop the head. Achieving this look required the labor of slaves, heated irons, and hours of painstaking effort. Such elaborate coiffures were markers of status. The grander the style, the wealthier the woman, as it implied ample leisure and servants dedicated to its upkeep. Hair also projected political loyalty. Empresses frequently debuted new hairstyles in statues and coins, setting trends that upper-class women emulated throughout the empire. Donning a hairstyle modeled after the empress was more than mere flattery. It was a statement of allegiance. Meanwhile, societal hierarchies were clear. Enslaved individuals were often compelled to maintain short or plain hair, stripping them of this form of personal expression. Soldiers prioritized practicality, adopting short, functional cuts that emphasized unity and discipline rather than individual flair. Then there were those who rebelled through their hair choices. Some Romans consciously grew long hair or embraced barbarian styles to reject imperial norms. Gladiators, in particular, used dramatic hairstyles to cultivate imposing stage personas, part athlete, part celebrity, part ominous figure. Shifting east to ancient Japan, hair was far more than personal appearance. It embodied discipline, duty, and deep cultural heritage. Nowhere was this more apparent than the iconic shonmachi, the distinctive samurai topknot. This wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a cultural pact. Initially, the shaved crown beneath the topknot was a practical adaptation that made wearing samurai helmets, kabuto, more comfortable and secure in battle. Yet, as peace prevailed during the Edo period, this style's meaning evolved. The topknot became a fixed symbol of warrior status, honor, and unwavering devotion to Bushido, the way of the warrior. Cutting off the topknot was profoundly symbolic, not a trivial change, but a mark of disgrace or loss of status. A samurai who fell out of favor might be forced to remove his topknot or do so himself, signaling that he was no longer worthy of his rank. In the gravest situations, the act of cutting it off preceded seppuku, the ritual suicide that was itself a potent cultural expression of honor and redemption. In some, across these cultures, hair transcended mere aesthetics, becoming a powerful language of identity, status, loyalty, and rebellion. Each strand carried weight, telling stories of individuals and societies alike. In ancient Japan, hair was much more than a mere aesthetic choice. It served as a profound social language, rich with symbolism and cultural significance. During the Han period, from 794 to 185, noble Japanese women cultivated extraordinarily long hair, sometimes so lengthy it surpassed the length of their own bodies. They allowed their tresses to flow straight down their backs in a style known as saburashi. This was not simply a matter of beauty. Rather, it embodied elegance, patience, and social status. The care required to maintain such luxurious locks, time-consuming and demanding resources, was a luxury reserved exclusively for the aristocracy, signaling their elite position in society. As time progressed into the Edo period, women's hairstyles evolved into increasingly elaborate and stylized creations. The shimada, a distinctive coiled bun, became prominent and was adorned with various pins, combs, and decorative elements, each carefully imbued with meaning. These hairdos functioned like social codes. They could signify a woman's marital status, her age, or even her profession. For instance, courtesans and geishas sported dazzling, intricate hairstyles that were not mere ornamentation, but carried valuable information about their training levels and professional experience. Hair was a medium through which cultural cues were communicated vividly. Hair could also serve as a subtle, or sometimes overt, form of rebellion. During certain shogunate regimes, strict laws dictated acceptable hairstyles based on class distinctions. Deviating from these rules, even by allowing one's hair to grow in an unapproved fashion, could provoke suspicion and lead to punishment. Yet, defiant individuals such as artists, actors, and ronin, the masterless samurai, often challenged these restrictions. By bending or breaking the rules, they made bold statements about their identity and resistance, using their hair as an expressive tool. Throughout ancient Japan, hair symbolized much more than mere decoration. It was inherently bound to concepts of duty, devotion, and drama. Whether in the dignified stillness of a samurai or the graceful, elaborate swirl atop a geisha's head, hairstyles functioned as acts of storytelling and expressions of honor, weaving a tapestry of deep cultural memory. Turning to ancient Africa, hair was equally significant, transcending personal style to become a complex language of identity and spirituality. From the intricate cornrows of the Sahel to the towering coils of the Ha, African hairstyles carried messages as vivid as any spoken language. Long before colonial interference, African hair culture embraced rich symbolism, craftsmanship, and acts of resistance. In Nubia, south of ancient Egypt, communities crafted stylized braids and twists that conveyed social rank, age, and clan affiliations. Nubian queens, such as Amanitore and Amanishakheto, adorned themselves with elaborate braided wigs and headpieces that rivaled the grandeur of Egyptian royalty, asserting their power and beauty with striking confidence. Further west, in present-day Nigeria, the Yoruba and Igbo peoples regarded hair as a living canvas for artistry. Intricately woven styles were purposefully created to denote critical life stages or statuses. Some reserved specifically for brides, others for warriors or spiritual initiates. Hairdressers held esteemed positions, nearly priest-like in their cultural importance. Trusting someone with your hair was tantamount to entrusting them with your very essence. Among the Himba people of Namibia, a tradition endures that involves coating and sculpting hair with red ochre paste, made from powdered stone mixed with butterfat. These ochre hairstyles serve a dual purpose. They protect the hair from the harsh desert climate and simultaneously signal vital life markers, from puberty rites to marital status. For Himba women, their hair is literally shaped by the land and sea, weaving their physical environment into their personal and cultural identity. In all these cultures, Japanese and African alike, hair transcended mere appearance. It was a potent form of communication, a symbol of status and spirituality, and sometimes a courageous declaration of resistance and individuality. One of the most captivating stories within African hair history is how it became a coded symbol of resistance. During the brutal transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans cleverly used hairstyles as silent acts of defiance and ways to remember their heritage. Cornrows were far more than a practical hairstyle. They carried hidden meanings. Some intricate patterns acted as maps, marking escape routes or safe gathering places. Others maintained ancestral styles, each twist and braid a quiet refusal to let their identity be erased. In many West African societies, Shaving the head was a powerful sign of mourning or a spiritual rite of passage. Conversely, thick dreadlocks often represented immense strength, a connection to the divine or the valor of a warrior. Hair, in these cultures, held sacred significance. It was never merely about appearance. However, colonial powers later imposed Eurocentric beauty standards that stigmatized these deeply meaningful styles. Yet, these ancient roots of African hair culture were never wholly erased. They survived in memories, in skilled hands, in braids passed from mother to daughter. And now these traditions are being reclaimed globally. Shifting focus to ancient Greece, hair was no mere personal detail. It was a grand public performance that expressed virtue, intellect, and civilization itself. From the tightly curled locks of young Athenians to the flowing hair of revered philosophers, hairstyles helped shape how the gods and citizens perceived an individual. Let's begin with men. In Greece's earlier eras, men often wore their hair long, tied back with ribbons or bands. Legendary heroes like Achilles and Odysseus were lauded in epic poetry for their shining, flowing hair, a symbol of vitality, nobility, and divine favor. Long hair during this time was intertwined with masculinity and heroism. Yet, by the classical period, standards evolved. A well-groomed, moderately short haircut became the hallmark of an Athenian man. Beards, however, remained prominent. Philosophers, statesmen, and educators, figures like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, all sported beards. The beard symbolized wisdom and maturity, while a clean-shaven forehead and face represented openness and rational thought. A long beard paired with neatly trimmed hair conveyed intellect triumphing over impulse, logic ruling emotion. Interestingly, slaves and foreigners could be forcibly shaved as marks of submission or inferiority, making the privilege of bearing proper hair a political statement. For women, hair was deeply connected to ideals of domestic virtue. Respectable women wore their hair up and covered, when in public, braided or coiled into elegant buns. Loose hair was generally reserved for special rituals, especially mourning or ecstatic religious ceremonies, such as those in the Dionysian cults, where unbound hair symbolized a deliberate breaking away from social order. Girls typically kept their hair down until puberty. At that transition, their first braid would be cut and offered to Artemis in a sacred coming-of-age rite. This gesture marked the conclusion of childhood and the ushering in of responsible membership in society. Even Greek goddesses had distinctive hairstyles. For example, Athena was famously depicted with her hair neatly arranged beneath her war helmet, embodying wisdom and strategic warfare. Hair in ancient cultures was far more than mere appearance. It was a profound emblem of strategy, discipline, and identity. Consider the strands that adorned the gods themselves. Aphrodite's flowing curls, for instance, were not just beautiful, but embodied divine sensuality and celestial allure. For mortals, hairstyles served as a bridge to the divine, allowing them to channel godly qualities by adopting similar forms. In ancient China, hair held deep moral and cultural significance, intertwined with philosophical beliefs, family responsibilities, and imperial authority. The smooth top knots favored by Confucian scholars, and the elaborate buns crafted by Tang Dynasty court ladies, were not whims of fashion, but deliberate expressions of status and virtue. Each element of the hairstyle harmonized aesthetics with symbolism. Altering one's hair was no trivial matter. It was laden with consequences because of Confucian filial piety, one of the cardinal principles teaching that the body, including hair, is a sacred gift from one's parents. To cut or damage it without necessity was considered a serious disrespect, a belief that ingrained itself in society for centuries. The gravity of this was evident in harsh penalties for criminals, whose heads were shaved not just as a form of punishment, but also a symbolic act of humiliation and spiritual separation from their community. Men traditionally wore their hair long, often tying it into top knots or buns. Scholars, poets, and government officials commonly complimented these hairstyles with flowing robes and caps, a visual testament to wisdom, self-control, and allegiance to social order. Encountering a man in public with untamed or disheveled hair was unsettling. It suggested madness, grief, or defiance. For women, hairstyles were carefully regulated by age and social rank. Young girls commonly sported twin buns or side ponytails, clear markers of their unmarried status. Marriage brought a transformation. A more mature hairstyle, such as a single coil or bun, often adorned with combs, jade pieces, or gold hairpins. Court ladies and empresses of the Tang dynasty elevated this art to grand spectacles, sculpting their hair into towering, intricate arrangements adorned with phoenix-shaped pins, flowers, and colorful silk ribbons. Hair was also a political statement. Changes in dynasty often meant enforced alterations in appearance. When the Manchu-led Qing dynasty overthrew Ming China, they imposed the Qing hairstyle. A shaved forehead with the remaining hair braided into a long queue. This style became a bitter symbol of subjugation and foreign domination. Many Han Chinese resisted vehemently, preferring death to adopting what they considered a betrayal of their cultural identity. Conversely, Taoist monks shaved their heads completely to renounce worldly ties, as did Buddhist monks who embraced head shaving as a symbol of detachment from material existence and acceptance of impermanence. Turning to ancient India, hair held sacred status, intimately connected with ritual purity, caste identity, and spiritual symbolism. It was a potent expression of both devotion and social structure. From the twisted dreadlocks of holy sages to the fully shaved heads of pilgrims, hair narrated intricate tales of belief, discipline, and personal transformation. Take the sadhus, wandering ascetics who renounced conventional life. They never cut, combed, or confined their hair. Instead, it grew freely into long, matted dreadlocks called jata, symbolizing their spiritual potency and profound connection to the divine. Their hair was a living testament to their renunciation, embodying their path of devotion and asceticism. Let's delve into the profound symbolism of hair across various ancient cultures, where hairstyles transcended mere aesthetics to convey deep spiritual, social, and political meanings. In some traditions, hair was a powerful emblem of renunciation and detachment from material things. The longer and wilder the hair, the stronger the message. For instance, sadhus, spiritual ascetics, revered Lord Shiva, the god known for destruction and meditation, who famously wore his matted locks, or jata, to restrain the mighty Ganges River. By emulating Shiva's untamed hair, sadhus signaled their transcendence beyond vanity, family ties, and even personal identity. Conversely, in other Hindu traditions, the complete opposite approach to hair carried profound sanctity. Pilgrims often shaved their heads before visiting sacred sites, offering their hair as a literal sacrifice, a symbol of surrender and spiritual purification. Even seemingly everyday events held ritual importance. Children's first haircuts were significant rites of passage believed to cleanse negative karma accumulated from past lives. Moreover, mourning rituals required close male relatives to shave their heads regularly, expressing humility and a deliberate detachment from worldly attachments. Hair also functioned as a potent social marker, communicating caste and marital status throughout the community. Upper caste men customarily maintained a single tuft of hair, known as the shika, atop their head after shaving the rest clean. This distinctive topknot identified them as twice born, part of the priestly or scholarly class responsible for sacred rites. Removing the shika without legitimate cause was tantamount to social death. Women's hairstyles held equally rich significance. Unmarried girls usually wore their hair loose or in simple braids, while married women styled theirs into buns or intricate coils. A well-oiled, neatly braided hairstyle was a testament to discipline, beauty, and family honor. Regional and economic differences influenced adornments, but jasmine flowers, gold clips, and ornamental combs were staples for festivals and weddings. The power of hair extended even into the realm of sensuality and eroticism. Ancient texts, like the Kama Sutra, detail alluring hair arrangements, and temple sculptures at sites such as Kujuro vividly portray women with elaborate hair cascading down their backs, sculpted with liquid grace. These styles weren't just decorative, they convey allure and sexual potency. Broadly speaking, hairstyles were not only a means of fitting into society, but also tools for standing out, resisting, and rebelling. Across civilizations, altering or rejecting the dominant hairstyle became an act of defiance, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, against prevailing cultural norms, imperial authorities, or oppressive systems. Take Judea, under Roman rule, for example. Jewish people adhered to strict religious laws and deliberately avoided the elaborate grooming preferred by their Roman overlords. Many Jewish men refused to shave their beards or style their hair in Roman fashions, consciously preserving a distinct identity tied to spiritual observance. To them, hair was not a matter of fashion. It was an expression of faith. In an empire obsessed with assimilation, their appearance spoke volumes as a peaceful yet potent form of protest. Turning to ancient Gaul during Julius Caesar's conquest, the Celts distinguished themselves with wild, lime-washed hair that stood stiffly upright, often styled into mohawk-like crests. Though Roman writers disparaged it as barbaric, the Gauls viewed these hairstyles as living war paint. Their fierce and striking hair designs terrorized enemies and forged a powerful tribal unity against Roman occupation. Further east, the Parthians and later the Sassanids, two formidable empires, also wielded appearance as a symbol of strength. Their kings sported long curled hair and thick beards, powerful emblems of authority and virility. In all these cultures, hair was far more than mere decoration. It was a dynamic language conveying belief, identity, and resistance. Hair in ancient times went far beyond mere aesthetics. It was a powerful symbol of divine authority and deep cultural pride. To the Romans, certain hairstyles appeared exotic, even effeminate, while to the Persians, those same styles were emblematic of royalty and ancestral heritage. Through their hair, people boldly declared, "We are not you." Even within more restrictive societies, hair served as a potent form of resistance. Enslaved individuals across empires, from Greece to the Americas, were often forced to shave their heads to erase their identities. Yet, whenever possible, they used hair to preserve their lineage, memories, and acts of defiance. Braids could hide seeds, beads carried meaningful symbolism, and hairstyles themselves recreated maps, myths, or secret messages. Women also wielded their hair as an act of rebellion. In Sparta, for example, unmarried women famously wore their hair short, standing apart from the long flowing locks common to other Greek women. This was a statement of independence and readiness for physical exertion. Roman women at times shunned the elaborate courtly styles in favor of simpler, modest looks that aligned with philosophical ideals like Stoicism or early Christianity. When emperors fell from power, their distinctive hairstyles fell with them. Cutting one's imperial-style hair became a risky but courageous act of political dissent or loyalty. Across all these cultures, hair was never just a reflection of society. It was a deliberate tool to reshape it. In ancient civilizations, when voices were muted and swords drawn, the scalp transformed into a vibrant canvas of resistance. A braid, a buzz cut, a curl. These could convey messages far louder than words ever dared to express.